Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Wilson Normal and Industrial Institute, A Community Response to Injustice by Lisa Y. Henderson. This is part of one of the programs sponsored by the local history and genealogy section of the Wilson County Public Library. Lisa Henderson is a Mercy Hospital baby, as she says, born and raised in Wilson. She has degrees from UNC Chapel Hill, Harvard Law, and Columbia University, and she is basically an expert in the history and genealogy of East Wilson, the African American community. And she is most well known for her blog, Black, White, Awake, and her work on the Lane Street Project. So with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Tammy and Amanda and the Wilson County Public Library for inviting me to speak as part of your Black History Month programming. And also I want to thank all of you for choosing to spend this evening with me. As Tammy mentioned, I'm author of the blog Black, White, Awake, which documents African American families and history in Wilson County. I've been vaguely aware of the story I'm about to tell since I was a child, but only since researching for Black, White, Awake have I learned its details and understood its importance in Wilson's history. Sparked by African American women in the Jim Crow South, the school boycott and the establishment of Wilson Normal and Industrial Institute were acts of prolonged resistance that unified Wilson's Black working and middle classes against white supremacy and violence against women. Together, they constitute the most revolutionary collective protest against the abuse of Black women, or to use a modern term, misogynoir, in the history of Wilson County. The school boycott and the industrial school are largely forgotten in Wilson, and their heroes go unsung. Tonight, we change that. So let's start by meeting the main actors in this story. So first, there are the teachers. This is a photograph of 9 of the teachers at the colored graded school, which was the public school for all African American children in Wilson up into the 1920s. And it was located on what is now kind of the place where Black Creek Road merges with Pender Street. So that's the location now. And that area is actually still called the schoolyard. So these are 9 of the teachers. And this lady here, the second from the left on the bottom row, is Mary C. Ewell. And she plays a really important role in this story. The next image, this is the principal who was involved. This was J.D. Reed, who had a number of important roles in the community. He was very much involved in the establishment and funding or fundraising for Mercy Hospital. And then after his teaching career or his principalship ended, he was involved in Wilson's Black Bank, the commercial bank, which was on Nash Street. And then there was the superintendent, and that was Charles L. Kuhn. Many of you are aware that Charles Kuhn was the superintendent of schools in Wilson County, and after his death, the local high school, at least the high school that was in this era of segregation, was the white high school, was named for him. So I attended Kuhn when it was essentially a junior high school in the late 1970s, and was among the last classes that they attended. This would have been just prior to the establishment of Bedingfield and Hunt High School. So we're gonna, I had to say, oh, and this is the school. This is the Wilson Colored Graded School. So this is where the sort of initial incident that sparked this action unfolded. oops, sorry, not too far. So the incident itself, this is April 1st, 1918. It was Easter Monday, and daylight savings time was newly in effect. The teachers at the color graded school arrived at the new time. The principal, J.D. Reed, was late. When the school janitor telephoned him, Reed responded, "Let the teachers and the children wait." He finally arrived, the school day passed, and at 2:25, teacher Mary C. Ewell dismissed her students. Principal Reed asked whether she was dismissing at the old time or the new time, and Ewell responded, "I'm dismissing on the new time, since these children have been here since 7:30 in the morning." Reed said, "That's your fault," and then called Superintendent Charles L. Kuhn to lodge a complaint against Ewell. Kuhn ordered her to come to his office at 5 o'clock that afternoon. At Kuhn's office, J.D. Reed gave a version of events to which Ewell protested. Kuhn turned to her, "Do you make Reed out to be a liar?" and threatened to kick her out of his office. Ewell said she would see herself out. Reed interjected, and she again challenged his story. Kuhn stood up from his desk. "Shut up, or I'll slap you down." In response to another comment from the principal, Ewell said, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Mr. Reed," and caught a stinging blow to the face from Kuhn's right hand. Ewell beseeched Reed to protect her, but he told her to behave herself and stood in the door to block her from leaving. Mary C. Ewell returned to work the next day and taught every day until payday. As Reed handed out checks to the teachers gathered, Ewell asked him why he had sat by and let a white man slap her. Reed said, "Because you would not close your mouth when you were ordered by the white man to do so." Black Wilson was outraged. The Colored Ministerial Union, represented by Calvary Presbyterians Hallie B. Taylor, St. Mark's Episcopals Robert N. Perry, Tabernacle Missionary Baptists Alfred L. E. Weeks, Ebenezer Baptists Charles T. Jones, and a Reverend A. Bynum, and the Negro Business League, represented by real estate developer Samuel H. Vick, barbers Braswell R. Winstead and Walter S. Hines, and Dr. Frank S. Hargrove, demanded a response from the graded school board. They asserted that Reed was, quote, "entirely persona non grata to their people and had lost his usefulness among them as an educator," end quote. When neither apology nor action followed, April 9th, to the Board of Education of Wilson County, Superintendent of Schools of Wilson County, and Principal of the Colored Graded School of Wilson, and to all whom it may concern. On account of the discourteous treatment of Professor J.D. Reed, the principal of the Wilson Colored Graded School, to us as teachers under his direction, and on account of the terrible ordeal through which one of us, a teacher in the above stated school, had to go on account of the unchristian and unmanly procedure of the principal, J.D. Reed, which aforestated ordeal, if told, would cause every man who respects pure womanhood to look upon the above stated principal, J.D. Reed, as the worst specimen of manhood possible to find. And further, on account of the incompetency and untruthfulness of the above mentioned principal, J.D. Reed, which we are prepared to approve, and which he attempts to hide from the superintendent, Board of Education, and the public in general by a high-handed, ironclad, and abusive rule over those who serve under him, we, the undersigned teachers of the Wilson Colored Graded School, who have tried in every way to help him, but in return have only been treated as a chain gang crew under criminal offense, have lost respect for the above-named principal, J.D. Reed, and tender our resignation. Done at the Wilson Colored Graded School, this 9th day of April, 1918, Miss M.C. Ewell, Miss J.B. Pride, Miss M.L. Garrett, Miss S.R. Battle, Miss G.M. Battle, Miss G.M. Burks, Miss L.B. Davis, Miss M.M. Jenkins, Ms. S.D. Weidman. This photo is believed to depict the 11 teachers who resigned en masse from the colored graded school in April 1918. Mary C. Ewell is marked with an arrow. I have not been able to locate the original of this photo, so this is obviously a copy of a copy of a copy, but these are the 11. In a matter of days, 2 more teachers, Walter Hines' wife, Sarah S. Hines, and these were the parents of Principal Carl W. Hines, who many of you may have known, and Samuel H. Vick's daughter, Elba Vick, sent in their resignations as well, bringing the number of walkouts to 13 of the school's 14 teachers. The 14th, presumably, was J.D. Reed's wife, Eleanor P. Reed. In the meantime, Wilson's Black parents withdrew their children from school, and with no teachers anyway, the colored graded school shut down. At their meeting with the ministers and businessmen, school board members asked if it would pay to reorganize for the short space of time remaining in the academic year. The answer was no. The Sunday after the incident, J.D. Reed was jumped by 3 men as he left morning services at First Baptist Church, which is now Jackson Chapel, First Missionary Baptist Church. Frank Hooker, Henry Lucas, and Will Jenkins got in a few licks before they were separated from Reed, and the police alleged that Jenkins even had a gun, which he denied. Fearing for his life, Reed asked the mayor for protection, and police officers were stationed at his house for several nights. Some of you may recognize the house. This is the J.D. Reed's house at 600 East Green Street. Some of you may know it actually as the convent after the Reeds. The Reeds sold this house to the Oblate Sisters of Providence, who were the nuns at St. Alphonsus Church. So this is the house that the police were stationed around to protect J.D. Reed from an angry community. Late April. Mary Ewell notified W.E.B. Du Bois of the NAACP of what was brewing in Wilson. The collection of his papers housed at the University of Massachusetts contains this letter, which hints at additional correspondence, though apparently none has been found. Mr. W.E.B. Du Bois, my dear sir, your letter of April 18th was received, and in reply, I wish to say that I will send you full details of my trouble here in Wilson, and also newspaper clippings and photographs in a few days. Thanking you for the interest that you have taken in this matter, I am very sincerely yours, Miss M.C. Ewell. In the meantime, the shocking stance taken by Wilson's Black community reverberated throughout Eastern North Carolina, compelling C.F. Epps, the principal of a colored graded school in Greenville, to intervene. His arrival in Wilson, determined to break the so-called Black line, was unwelcome. As reported in the Wilmington Dispatch, one community member commented frankly, "We's had trouble enough, the Lord knows, with white and Black coons, and I'm here to tell the gentleman from Greenville that we ain't gonna stand for no furrin coon putting his paw in our stew." Epps took the temperature of the room and called for police protection until he could catch the Norfolk and Southern train back home to Greenville. Dismayed by rumors attacking her character, Mary C. Ewell took the extraordinary step of pressing charges against Charles L. Coon, one of the most powerful white men in the city. A warrant issued charging him with assault and battery. And a newspaper reported Coon's retort. Any other white man, he said, would have readily done the same thing. On April 30th, 1918, the Wilson Daily Times printed an account of Coon's initial court appearance that was surprisingly sympathetic toward Ewell. And this possibly was motivated by kind of a personal beef between Charles Kuhn and the Times publisher, John D. Gold. Ewell, her lawyer, 8 teachers, and assorted character witnesses had arrived at the magistrate's office only to find that Kuhn had come, posted bond, and gone, having obtained an earlier court time of which Ewell had not been notified. Ewell's lawyer, and I do not know who that was granted permission to make a statement and declared that Ewell was reluctantly prosecuting Kuhn in order to make sure that the public knew the truth of what happened, to assert her rights to protection under the laws of the state of North Carolina, and to combat rumors that she was a boisterous troublemaker who, among other things, had protested against riding in the colored section of the train. In other words, Ewell wanted to clear her good name. And she also was the spiritual forebear of Rosa Parks. Summer of 1918. Charles L. Kuhn was convicted of simple assault and fined 1 penny plus costs. The matter was over as far as he was concerned. But news of the Ewell incident had spread in the Black press as far away as Seattle, Washington, where a journalist there penned a fiery column declaring, quote, "Any man that slaps a woman is himself a cowardly cur, and we would do our best to him great bodily harm if he struck a woman in our presence, whether she be black, white, red, or yellow. We often pray for such an opportunity," end quote. A Black Chicago reporter traveling through the South spared no words in describing his disdain for J.D. Reed. Quote, "It's a small man who would strike a woman, but they have it down fine in Wilson, North Carolina. And if it is kept up much longer, there will be some going home, but which home I am not prepared to say myself. I never want to see a white man strike one of our best women in this world, for I would just then send word to the angels to dust my wings, for I will be on my way for them. And then send word to the devil to heat the furnace just a little hotter, for I have started someone to take quarters therein." Mary Ewell, on the other hand, received her full due as a, quote, "refined, cultured Christian woman with the dignity of a queen." The reporter ended saying, "There's lynching going on, and there are men who would help to have some of their best killed or chased out of town by trying to stand in with the white folks." Over the summer, as this Times article shows, actually Greensboro Daily News article shows, the Black community continued to focus on J.D. Reed's behavior, vehemently protesting his continued employment as principal, and even the employment of his wife, Eleanor P. Reed, as a teacher. The school board finally gave in and asked for his resignation. And I'll take a moment to make an aside here. It struck me initially as curious that the primary focus seemed to be on J.D. Reed and not on Charles Kuhn. Part of this, I think, was simply a reflection of what was possible. What was a calculation on where the most pressure could be brought to bear. And also there was really a sense of deep offense that Reed had not defended her. That not only had he not defended Mary Ewell, but that he essentially had served her up to Charles Kuhn to be abused. So now we're in the fall of 1918. We're about 6 months after the incident in Charles Cohn's office. In late September, the school board announced that Principal Clarissa Williams, who was an African-American woman, would lead 9 new teachers when the colored graded school opened again on October 7th. That day, however, the Raleigh News and Observer printed a piece capturing the apparent exasperation of Wilson school officials with the sizable element of the African-American community that refused to send its children to public school. This group, called the Anti-Reedites, had secured a building, and Father Robert N. Perry of St. Mark's Episcopal and Baptist minister Spurgeon Davis, who was pastor briefly at First Baptist, were set to head the new private school. The article, however, sorely understated the basis of Black opposition to the public school, claiming that the Anti-Reedites were opposed to a woman serving as J.D. Reed's successor, rather than acknowledging deep and specific grievances against Reed himself. On October 14th, 2018, just a week after the colored graded school, Wilson Normal and Industrial Institute opened its doors in a 2-story building on Vance Street, owned by Samuel H. Fick. My grandmother, Hattie Henderson Ricks, remembered it this way. First of the year I went to school, and then I didn't go back no more to the graded school. They opened the Wilson Training School on Vance Street with that old long stairway up that old building down there. Well, I went over there. So my grandmother was about 7 years old in the spring of 1918 and lived on Elba Street, which is a short street that runs between Green and Viola Streets. And she had quite a long way to walk to get to the colored graded school. But once the training school, the Wilson Normal and Industrial School was called, some people called it the training school, people called it the independent school, sometimes it was called the industrial school. But that school was really just about a block and a half from her house. And the little picture that I have there is her on the right with her sister. But it's her during the period of time that she would have attended the Wilson Training School. A month after it opened, the Daily Times acknowledged the existence of the Industrial Institute, or Independent School as it was often called, in the community. And an interesting note about the building in which it was located. This again was a building that Sam Vick owned on Vance Street, but it had originally been the old Methodist church building. And this would have been, I believe, the building that was the precursor to the current St. John AME Zion Church. And Silas Lucas had moved that building to this site on Vance Street. Again, Sam Vick owned it and donated it for the school. This, of course, is Samuel H. Vick, educator, church leader. He was one of the founders of Calvary Presbyterian. He worked long and hard as a Presbyterian missionary throughout Eastern North Carolina. He was a farmer, he was a banker, real estate developer, businessman, and of course, the person for whom Sam Vick Elementary School was named. And then here we have the school itself. This is the only known photograph of Wilson Normal and Industrial Institute. There is the long staircase that my grandmother referred to there leading up to the second floor. I do not know what the occasion was here. There are obviously many dozens of people in this photograph, children, teachers, parents, no doubt. This picture actually came from a booklet that includes the memoirs of Edward M. Barnes, who was the longtime principal at Darden High School. And he attended the Normal and Industrial Institute. And I wish, once again, I wish I could find the original. But this is really just an amazing, amazing photograph. In a November recap of the whole saga, the African-American newspaper, the New York Age, reported that the new school had enrolled 250 students, and also noted that fewer than a dozen attended the colored graded school. The Age continued close coverage over the next several months, probably by way of an unnamed Wilson correspondent. In January, in an article titled "School Started to Protect Womanhood," the Age updated the enrollment numbers, an astonishing 441 students, and detailed the school's revenue sources. My grandmother recalled that tuition was 25 cents a week, which closely matches the $100 per month income noted in the article. The school also received $250 a month in pledges from Wilson residents and solicited another $150 from others, quote, in sympathy with the Wilson people in the stand they are taking for the protection of our women. And any checks could be made payable to Noah J. Tate, treasurer. He was a barber who lived on Pender Street. Actually, his house is still standing just north of Green Street. In April of 1919, the Age reported on a bazaar that raised more than $1,000 to support more than 600 students and 10 teachers. So this was, I mean, the overcrowding, this was a really crowded school, and really a testament to the overwhelming support that the community showed for this school. I mean, people were still paying taxes, basically, to support the public school system, and yet we're coming up with tuition to support the independent school. Georgia Burke was one of the 11 original teachers who had walked out of the school. She used her outstanding musical abilities to become one of the school's chief fundraisers. She put on lavish concerts in Sam Vick's Globe Theater, which was in the 500 block of East Nash Street, and organized musical events staged in tobacco warehouses to raise funds. So just kind of an aside on Georgia Burke. Some of you, this is an article from Jet Magazine from 1952, but anybody who, I don't know, is probably less than, anybody who's a boomer would recognize this distinctive Jet typeface and photographs. This could have been a 1972 Jet article. But anyway, in 1928, Georgia Burke, who was at that time teaching at the independent school, was taking a summer teaching course at Columbia University in New York. And she attended a rehearsal for the play, a musical, Blackbirds of 1928. She was waiting for a friend, and she sang a few songs, including St. Louis Blues, and was immediately hired for the choir. Burke took a leave of absence from teaching in Wilson and never returned. This was the start of a long career on Broadway, and she appeared in a number of plays, including Anna Lucasta. She was in Porgy and Bess, and also in Cabin in the Sky. So in May of 1919, the colored graded school, the Wilson Normal and Industrial Institute, held its first commencement ceremony. The Daily Times published the full program, which reveals the depth of investment by East Wilson's elite in the composition of the school's board of directors. So if you see here, you've got Professor Sam H. Vick, who is the president. You had Walter S. Hines, who was a barber and businessman, vice president. William H. Phillips was dentist, secretary. Noah Tate, barber, treasurer. C.L. Darden, who was the son of C.H. Darden, and who carried on for many decades the family's undertaking business. W.A. Michener, William Michener, who was also a physician. J.W. Rogers, a businessman. D.C. Yancey was a pharmacist. I'm not familiar with M.H. Wilson. L.A. Was a businessman. William Hines, the brother of Walter Hines, was a barber and also a businessman, and both Hines brothers were also real estate developers in East Wilson. And then you had J.D. Reed's own brother, Elijah L. Reed, who was a veterinary surgeon. So you have the program. Reverend A.L.E. Weeks, who was pastor at Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, delivered the invocation. And 17-year-old Boise Barnes, who many of us will have known, if not personally, but know of as Dr. B.O. Barnes, after whom the school was named, shared a class history. Addie Davis, who is the mother, or was the mother of U.S. Congressman G.K. Butterfield Jr., was class valedictorian. And note here, this, what is it here? I don't see it now, I can't find it. But in any case, the Negro National Anthem was performed. And what's interesting to me is that, so James Weldon Johnson composed Lift Every Voice and Sing as a poem in 1900. And his brother, John Rosamond Johnson, set it to music in 1905. And in 1919, which was, of course, the year of the industrial school's first graduation, the NAACP dubbed the song the Negro National Anthem. And so this would have been one of the first performances of this song publicly as the Negro, oh, here it is, up here, as the Negro National Anthem. Samuel H. Vick introduced the speaker for the commencement program, who was a Judge William Harrison of Chicago. Judge Harrison delivered to the graduates a remarkably unprogressive message at odds with the stand for civil rights that the community had resolutely taken just a year earlier. The Times made no mention of the school's revolutionary beginnings, preferring to focus at length on Harrison's message of admiration for white men's example and guidance. No matter, Wilson Normal and Industrial Institute's very existence said what it said. A year later, at the end of the school's second successful year, colored citizens submitted a letter to the Daily Times, giving thanks to their staff and supporters for a successful second academic year. However, in April 1921, almost exactly 3 years after the Coon incident, the New York Age reported that Mary C. Ewell and Georgia Burke had been insulted by two white clerks while shopping at Gay Brothers dry goods store, which is on Nash Street. A Black cafe owner named Bert Bowser came to their defense. A fight broke out, and Ewell and Burke escaped the store as Bowser fought off a crowd. Once again, Wilson's African-American community called for a boycott, but it seems that Mary Ewell had had enough. I have found no further reference to her in Wilson. With musicals and bake sales and fish fries, dimes and quarters paid from the meager earnings of tobacco factory workers, dollars pledged from the so-called big dogs of East Green Street, the Normal and Industrial School educated East Wilson's children for a decade. We must amplify the stories of Mary C. Ewell, who spoke truth to power more than 100 years ago, and the courageous women of the colored graded school, of Sam Vick and others who risked their hard-won but fragile status to challenge authority by creating an alternative school, and of the ordinary folk who turned their backs on a system that devalued and abused women. We must remember them as the heroes of their own lives and as inspirations for ours. So, as we end, question, where was the colored graded school? As we said, the colored graded school was down on Pender Street toward just south of town. And the Wilson Normal and Industrial School was on Vance Street, just before the intersection of Pender. That's the 600 block of Vance Street. So in 1922, the Sanborn insurance map shows the Wilson Normal and Industrial Institute at 604 Vance Street. So that's this building. This is Pender, and this is Vance. So this would have been 4 years, 4 years roughly after the school opened. The school closed in the late 1920s and became essentially an apartment building. And I found this 1954 ad for basically a rental ad, 604 East Vance, colored rental property, containing four room apartments and 1 2-room apartment and 5 complete baths. So that's the school was divided up into apartments for colored residents. And this is actually an ad not for tenants, but an ad selling the property as an investment. This is a 1964 aerial photo of East Wilson. And just to get your bearings, this is Pender Street, and this is Green Street. This is Elba, the street that I said my grandmother lived on. In fact, that's her house there. This would have been Viola, and this is Vance. And you can see here that, as encircled, the independent school was still standing. The Normal and Industrial Institute was still standing in 1964. But 7 years later, when this aerial was taken, the building had been demolished. So at some point in the late 60s, the building was torn down. And here's what's there today. This is the site today. Another small apartment building. So that is the story of Mary Ewell. That's the story of the teachers of the colored graded school, and the story of the parents, the community that responded to the mistreatment of one of their own by acting together to protest her treatment, and by taking it onto themselves to educate their own children. It's a story that just resonates so powerfully with me. It is, as I said, I mean, I grew up hearing bits and pieces of it, but I have committed myself every year on the anniversary of the incident to reposting in Black, White, Awake the story of Mary Ewell. And I hope that you will also share this story, make sure that your children know this story, make sure that people understand the history of not only just the history of our community, but the actions that people took, the sacrifices that people made to assert their rights, to assert their personhood. It's, I think, these are there are lessons in this story that resonate for us even today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and if there are any questions.
What year was Darden built?
Darden was built in 1923. So Darden actually overlapped with the Normal and Industrial Institute, but the Normal and Industrial Institute only had 8 grades. So there was some overlap because Darden was 5th through 12th, originally 5th through 11th. So there was some overlap. And so that really kind of, I think, spelled the end of the Normal and Industrial School, was that Wilson committed to building a new school, and parents gradually just sort of drifted back over. And then, of course, when Sam Vick Elementary was built in the 1930s, and the colored graded school was kind of upgraded a little bit, and it became known as the Sally Barber School. So that's what happened sort of in the 20s, and that's why the school eventually closed.
Now, I attended St. Alphonsus when it was in that Reed building, right across the street from Calvary Presbyterian Church.
Right.
Green,
And it's
Green Fender. So I went there, and then when they moved to Reed Street, I moved over there too.
Yeah, to Carroll. Yeah, when the school was set up in, and then of course I went to Kitty College of Knowledge much later in that same building on Carroll Street. Yeah.
I want to say that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say my mother taught at Sally Barber and my father taught at Darden.
Yes. And your grandfather was one of the men who was on the board of directors for the Normal and Industrial Institute.
Yeah, I've learned more about him from reading your articles than I ever knew growing up.
Thank you.
I want to say I just, read something about my great aunt, Roberta. I'm a Battle. And yes, and Roberta Battle was my my great aunt, which was my grandfather's sister. So it's amazing just to look at her and to see what, how she stood up and resigned her position.
Two of your great aunts, Roberta and Grace.
Yeah, I have a Grace Battle too. Grace,
both of them were teachers at the school. Yeah. So
nice to know that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
This is Vicki Cowan, and I just want to say my grandfather was Samuel Vick. My mother was Monty Vick Cowan, and to the Battles, we may be related because my uncle Robert Vick, all he used to say was Parker Battle Vick. He used to say that, Parker Battle Vick.
We might be. My father's name is Parker Battle, and his father was Parker, and my grandfather was John.
He said, really? He just kept saying.
I tell you, it is a whole week up in here.
So, I didn't grow up in Wilson, but my mother brought me back there every single summer.
Library will close in 15 minutes. All items must be checked out within the next 10 minutes. The library will close in 15 minutes. All items must be checked out within the next 10 minutes.
Okay.
I'm going to stop, But I'm just saying, even though I didn't grow up in Wilson, I grew up in New Jersey. My mother brought me back there every summer, so it's almost like I grew up playing on Facing Street with Dot Ellis and her children, and so this is a wonderful thing. I've learned more about my family from you, Lisa, than I actually knew, and I'm gonna keep in contact because I think with the Battles, because we're probably related.
I think we are. I kind of look
Great.
alike, right?
That's great. Any other questions? Let me see if I can see the chat. Oh, thank you, Barbara. Excellent. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Lisa, for an eye-opening presentation. I will be, and where can we find this presentation? Because I'd like to share it with some folks, my sister and other people who, some are still in Wilson, some have moved on.
I'll let Tammy or Amanda speak to that.
Amanda is trying to record it, so I'm not sure it would be posted, but I do have your email, Mr. Woodard, from where we sent you the link.
Okay, all right.
So as soon as we know, I will let you know. I will say that the library has a Facebook page that a lot of our presentations get posted on. We also have a YouTube channel that a lot of our videos and programs get posted on. So that may be some places to check. I will suggest that when you're looking on YouTube and you put in Wilson County Public Library, you put an NC after it the first time, or you'll wind up with Wilson County, Tennessee, which is what happened to me. But a lot of our programs, children's programs, local history programs, a lot of that gets posted. And we'd like to get our outreach out that way. Again, if anybody, because I am the genealogy and local history librarian, and Lisa, I hope you don't mind, if there's something you'd like to see a program on, please let us know, because we're always looking for ideas.
Sure. Wow.
So, and Eric, when I find out, I will post on Black Wide Awake, if I find out, when I find out where it's posted, I'll make sure I get that information out.
All right, terrific. I don't know if this is the time or not, but the first time that I opened one of your posts, I saw some Woodards in there. I think more like Nash County, and they were bequeathing, my relatives to their. It was. I didn't quite know how to feel, but I'm glad that I saw that. That pulled me in.
Yeah, it can be a lots of process, for sure. But I think it's, important for us to understand and to know. And I think it also, I think people can feel in some ways very, that their community doesn't really belong to them. That, there's sort of a dominant narrative, there's a dominant story about Wilson that is told, and it doesn't really include very many people that look like you or I, and you or me, I'm sorry, to the grammarians out there. So it's really important to me to write us back into that story, and to present, information that lets us see that, we have just as much ownership of Wilson County history as anyone who's there. We have been here for 300 years, as long as anybody has been in Wilson County. So let me see. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you as well, Allison. And thank you, Joan Boykin. Thank you.
Wow.
I gave Vicky an email. If you put in your chat, you'll see where you could contact, so we could see how we're connected. I put my email in there so you can contact me and we can kind of catch up and see how we are connected as family. Okay.
Wow.
Thank you, Briggs. Thank you very much. Any other questions about the school or the school's history? I wish there were more photographs. But they're just those two that I'm aware of. I have reached out to the Barnes family to see if anyone knows where the originals might be, and they don't. So right now, that's all we've got. The two, the three actually, the teachers, and then no, two, right? The teachers, and then the whole building with everybody standing out front.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, phenomenal job, though.
Yes.
It's Tracy. Hey.
Hi. Hey, Tracy.
I am dismayed that we don't know where Miss Yule is. That we've just lost track. What in the world do you think may have happened?
She was not from Wilson. She was a DC native.
Okay.
And it's actually interesting to me that of the teachers,
the library is now closing.
Were
the checkout desk is now closed. The library is now closed.
Let everybody get out.
Checkout desk is now closed.
So of the original 11 teachers, only a handful were from Wilson. The Battle sisters, Mrs. Hines, but Georgia Burke, for example, who went on to Broadway, was a Georgia native. So my best guess is that she went back to DC, but I have not been able to find her there. I did find a reference to a Mary Yule in Asheville. It was really intriguing, though, because this woman was a pharmacist, and she was the right age to be this Mary C. Yule. But I don't know if it's the same person. And then, of course, if she married, I don't, she may be sort of hiding in plain sight of a married name. So, yeah, it is disappointing that we don't know more about where she went. And it's also, so this letter that she wrote to Dr. Du Bois clearly speaks of, clearly implies that he had responded to her and that she was going to send him more. And his papers don't, at least as published, the collection, as I've been able to determine, doesn't contain anything else. And it doesn't contain copies of his correspondence to her.
Yeah.
I was going to say something.
Yes.
I was just going to say, back on that pharmacy lead, Howard University has a school of pharmacy that's been operating since the 1800s in DC. My great uncle went there. So, I wonder if she went back to DC and went to Howard.
Went to Howard, yeah. She may also have gone to, I think, Shaw also had a pharmacy school that was tied up with it. It had a medical school for a while, and I think it also conferred pharmacy degrees. One of Samuel Vick's brothers was a pharmacist who graduated from there, William H. Vick. Yeah. So yeah, it's possible. I have not been able to find much about her in Asheville, so it's just really hard to kind of probe and figure out if it's the same woman. Yeah, but she clearly was like, Wilson, I cannot. It's too much. Yeah, and an interesting thing about Charles Kuhn, he was a pretty violent man. I mean, there are other incidents, not just this one with Mary Ewell. I mean, I suspect that he thought that she was his going to be his most compliant, sort of victim. But there are other incidents in which he got into it with prominent people in the community, and it's kind of a measure of the sort of tolerance during that period for shenanigans by privileged white men, that not only does he get to keep being the superintendent when he's going around beating people, but he gets a whole school named after him that all of us had to go to. I mean, that bit of it's not even irony, it's something much darker that all of us of a certain age, who came up through Wilson City school system, attended a school named after a man who slapped a Black teacher in the face on her job. It boggles the mind, the 21st century mind anyway. Clearly did not bother anybody in Wilson in the 1950s or whenever Coon was named after him, 40s, 30s, whenever it was, up until the 1970s. But that's the world we live in, or lived in.
Was that the first school after the Civil War?
Coon?
No, the school where this incident took place.
Actually, no. There was something called the Wilson Academy. Don't know a lot about it. It was a private school, pretty amazing school, actually. Sam Vick went there. His brothers attended. DC Suggs. They all attended the school in the 1870s and 80s. And it sent several of its students primarily to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And that's essentially where, for example, where Sam Vick converted to Presbyterianism, and how he became, a missionary, and as I said, in Eastern North Carolina. But that was the first school, and there was a public school for Black children established in the 1880s and only operated briefly. There was a big kind of hubbub about the money that was being spent to educate Black people.
Yeah.
So it shut down. And then the colored graded school opened in the, I think, 1890s, early 1890s. And it operated at that location until basically Elvie Street School was the successor to Sally Barber School. And then the colored graded school became Sally Barber School. And it finally, it was falling to pieces in the 1940s. And then Elvie Street School was built.
Where did people like Dr. V.O. Barnes go to school?
He would have gone to the colored graded school up until the 8th grade. And then after that, you basically, until Darden opened, well, it was originally called the Wilson Colored High School, opened in 1923. If you wanted to go to high school, you had to leave Wilson. Wow. So people would go, would attend essentially almost all of what we now call HBCUs had preparatory divisions. And so you would go to Howard and basically do 4 years of high school at Howard, or you would go to Shaw, or you would go to St. Aug, or Lincoln was popular in Wilson for men anyway. A fair number of people went to what was then called Biddle, is now Johnson C. Smith, for high school. But that's until Darden opened. That's where you had to leave to go to school.
I think people went to Mary Potter.
Mary Potter, though Mary Potter was I think a little bit later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think in the 20s and 30s was
Yes.
and in the 40s. Yeah, it was with Mary Potter, but kind of the same thing. I mean, right. I mean, there was, you know, and that's in Wilson, right? So there was not a Black high school in the county until Frederick Douglass, or the precursor to Frederick Douglass, opened in the 30s. And then after that, outside of Elm City, there was not a Black high school until the 50s, when Spate and Springfield opened as a result of legal action, lawsuits filed. So children, if you look at Darden's student enrollment, there were children coming from, you know, there were children who lived on a farm out by Rock Ridge or somewhere, who would come and live in Wilson during the week with a family member to go to Darden, because there was no high school. There were kids who were from Greene County, kids who were from Johnston County, kids who were from all around Wilson, who lived in counties in which there was no public high school for Black children until, you know, the 30s and 40s. And so they would come to Wilson and stay with their relatives in order to get an education.
You mentioned some of the schools were private. Is that, and this was what, just after Reconstruction, and so I guess I'm wondering what the impetus for these schools were, you know, and I guess and of course the names aren't coming to me now. Some of the ones that you've mentioned, but you know, me personally, you know, when I think about that time period, I don't think about too much advocacy for the education of, you know, Black people or anything. So were most
Let me
private?
tell you something. I mean, I don't know what was in the water. I really don't know what it was, but, you know, out the gate, as they say, Black people in Wilson were trying to educate their kids. Wow. And particularly families that, for one reason or another, were able to quickly accumulate farmland, or had a trade, particularly blacksmiths. The Battle family, for example, Parker Battle was a blacksmith. You know, people who were carpenters. Daniel Vick was a carpenter. Those people were able to, they had some money, and they wanted nothing more than to lift their children into the middle class. And they did. I mean, I can't, you know, growing up in Wilson, there were two Black doctors, right? There was Dr. Sullivan, and there was Dr. Cowan. Okay. Those were the only two, and then William Hines a little bit before me, but I don't really remember Dr. Hines that well. But there were only a handful, let's put it that way. And certainly I probably still can count on one hand the number of people that say I grew up with who went on to become doctors. Right. But if you look in at men, because they're all men, who were born in Wilson, in Wilson County in the 1870s and 80s and 90s, I mean, there's doctors all over the place. They didn't stay in Wilson because Wilson had more Black doctors in 1920 than they had in 1970. You know, and so people didn't come back home because the market was saturated, basically. but there are, there was a Black doctor in Kinston. He was from Wilson. There was a, Black doctor in well, speaking of the battles, Dr. James Battle, who was in Greenville. Yeah. He was born in Wilson. So wow. Wilson, I don't know what was going on, but there was definitely a pipeline. And I say men, there were a few women. There was a Suggs family. I don't know, where Suggs Street is, just below Hine Street. Right. That land from, say, let's call it roughly Hine Street down to maybe 301 now, that all belonged to GW, Washington and Esther Suggs. They were from Greene County and came to Wilson County right after the Civil War. They bought this property. They sent their children, all of them, girls, boys, everybody, to college. One son became a doctor. A daughter was a teacher, an art teacher and her husband was a school principal. Another son was at one point president of what is now Savannah State University. It was then called Georgia College of something or the other. They eventually sold that property, divided it up and sold it. And so there aren't any Suggses now in Wilson. But this is really what sort of drives me with Black, White, Awake is for us to, I think we have this tendency to kind of accept a very unnuanced view of the past, that, we were enslaved and then, we were freed and there was Reconstruction and nobody had anything. And then, there was Jim Crow and then there was the Great Depression and then, the Civil Rights Movement. And in that kind of dominant, broad stroke narrative, it's very easy to lose sight of what sort of ordinary men and women were doing day to day, how people were, again, as folks say, making a way out of no way, how people were finding ways to improve their lives, even within, I'm not discounting the very tight, the constrictions that bound the lives of Black folks in Wilson. I mean, Wilson hung on a long time. I'm older than a number of people on this call, but I'm not that old. But I was born in a segregated hospital. That's my story. I was born in a segregated hospital. And the year I started first grade was the first year of full integration of Wilson County schools. And it was done essentially at the, with a gun in the, in their back. So Wilson's, I think people like to look back and say, oh, it wasn't so bad here. It was pretty bad. And nonetheless, right. You've got these amazing stories, and not just of men and women who went to college, but people who lived, in some ways, very ordinary lives. But I think of, so Tracy's on call. Tracy's my cousin. And our parents graduated from Darden in the early 1950s. And so we didn't go to Darden, but we just were like, oh my God, everybody wanted to go to Darden. Everybody wanted to graduate from Darden because it was just such an amazing institution. And, it had taken, people like our parents, who grew up really poor in East Wilson, but had been so, Darden was just this incredible incubator and this, this transformative place that, what couldn't you do if you had graduated from Darden High School? So we kind of missed that, but we knew, what it meant in our community. So, I try to highlight, all these stories, and some of them are negative, some of them are positive. I mean, it's life, it's real. But I think they should be told.
Yes. And again, I
We're
applaud
happy that
you.
you're doing this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for doing this. And Carol, I'm having technical difficulties, but I emailed you. I'm what my daughter calls low tech.
Yeah, I tell you, they could do that technology. Yeah, it's good to connect with you. I have your number. Thank you. It's good. This is real interesting. It really is. And I thank you.
Thank you so
Dr.
much.
Henderson. Yes.
Wow.
You say, in regard to technology, we're starting up our computer classes again at the library next month in person. So feel free to contact us if you want to sign up. Space will be limited, but we'll be doing more. Just a little plug there.
I wish I could go. I'm still in New Jersey, but I'm trying to make my way back to Wilson. And I appreciate you, Lisa, for everything that you do. You have no idea how grateful we are for what you've done for the ancestors. Because I'm a little older than you. So I can't get out there and do it anymore, but I just thank God for you, for everything that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Okay.
Once again, thank you to the library for extending this opportunity for me to talk about, something that's near and dear to me, something that I could probably talk to y'all all night about, but we all have things to do. Again, take a look at, if you want to know more about these stories or this particular story, there are probably 8 or 9 blog posts that touch on the boycott and on the school, as well as at latest count, almost 3,900 other posts about various people, places, and things in Wilson County. And here's my, plug. Well, not even a plug. Actually, it's a plea. If you have stories that you know of, family stories that you want to share, if you've got photographs, if you've got documents, if you have questions, if you've heard something about something and you want to know more about it, please reach out, to me, and I'll find out what I can find out. And I will definitely, so many people have contributed amazing photographs or other documents. And I love to kind of do a little research on them and then present them. So it's been very much a collaborative effort, and I really appreciate everybody's support. When I started this, I don't know what I thought it was going to be, but I didn't think that almost 6 years later it would be so meaningful, both to me but also to other people. So I really appreciate it.
I have a quick question. You referenced a bank some time ago.
The commercial bank.
Did you ever do a blog on that?
I have. Excuse me. Gosh, yes, I have. The commercial bank opened in 1921. It had literally, 100 or more investors, people who bought stock in it from all across Wilson County and a little bit beyond. J.D. Reed, who very quickly redeemed himself after this incident with Mary Ewell. He was kind of the the fundraiser. He traveled all around North Carolina and up and down the East Coast, trying to get people to invest in the bank. So it opened in 1921, and it kind of muddled along, was operating. And then just before the stock market crash in October of 1929, there was a fire in the safe. And when the fire department came and put out the fire, they noticed some kind of strange things. Like there seemed to be maybe 2 sets of books, and there was, just so an investigation starts, and lo and behold, J.D. Reed finds himself once again at the center of scandal. And he and another man, H.S. Stanback, who was the bank treasurer, were indicted and convicted of misappropriating funds. And so there's this trial, and all of these people, Black people, big money, little money, everybody testifies about how I went in and I tried to withdraw $100, and they told me, "Whoa, come back on Tuesday." And then I came back on Tuesday, and they said, "Oh, well, hold on, come back in a couple of more days." And it all just kind of fell to pieces. So that was the end of the Black bank, the commercial bank. I remember my grandmother telling me once that, when she was growing up, people were like, no, people's mattresses were just stuffed with money because nobody was messing around with banks anymore, having lost everything when the commercial bank collapsed. So, yeah. That was commercial bank. It was right on the corner of Pettigrew and Nash. I don't know what that building is, like a furniture building or warehouse or something there now, but that's where it was.
Wow.
Did he have to do time, or?
He did. He did. He served 5 years.
Wow.
And then his sentence was commuted, and he left. He didn't come back to Wilson at that point. He moved to Washington, D.C. I'll say this about the Reeds. His wife kind of soldiered on, she nearly lost her job over the school incident. And then once the bank collapsed, people wanted her fired again. The community was like this, so people were like, she didn't have anything to do with this. Obviously, she reared their children who were quite successful. In particular, Herbert Reed, who I was surprised to find out. Not that I was, bragging about it or anything, or had really thought about it, but I had assumed that I was the first African-American graduate of Harvard Law School from Wilson. I was not. Herbert Reed was. So, the sins of the father did not carry on to the Reed children.
Wow. Excellent. So that was the first and only Black bank in Wilson.
Yes.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. So, you think about it, Wilson had a Black everything, right? A Black hospital. There were no, when Mercy was founded in 1913, it was the only Black hospital east of Raleigh. So, Greenville, Goldsboro, Rocky Mount, Elizabeth City, you didn't go to the hospital. If you got sick and died at home. But Wilson had a Black hospital. Speaking of things that kind of connect you to the past, I was born there. I was among the last, as Tammy mentioned, I was among the last of the Mercy babies,
Wow.
born just before the hospital closed. And again, kind of speaking of Wilson's not so great record, you know, the reason that Mercy ultimately closed was that Wilson Memorial was expanding and wanted to get federal funding. And in order to get federal money, it had to integrate. I mean, after all, we're talking about, you know, we're 8 years after, 10 years after Brown v. Board of Education. So, you know, the hospital drags its feet and comes up with a couple of plans. And I think one of them involved integrating by floor. So, you know, it was the black floor, the white floor, the black floor, the white floor. And all of that was rejected. And finally, a plan was devised for full integration. And in order to do that, the city withdrew its basically financial support of Mercy, and Mercy closed. So in the fall of 1964, the last babies were born at Mercy in, I believe, September of 1964.
Really? Wow. Wow.
Yeah. My mother said it was a miserable experience. She said what she remembers most about the delivery room, I was born in June, were the curtains flapping. The windows were open and the curtains were flapping. It was so hot. And that's what she remembers most about her. I don't know how many days she had to, and her the obstetrician and the pediatrician were white, and they had practicing privileges at Mercy. So they would do their rounds. They would come from across the tracks and visit their patients at Mercy. So you had to wait until, you know, Dr. Pope and Dr. Kirkland had, you know, come around over to East Wilson, you know, to say, as my mother says it, Dr. Pope had a drawl, and she would say, he said, well, Beverly, okay, you can leave now. So I think I was born on a Friday, she was released on Sunday, and not a moment too soon, because what would happen on Sundays, so right around the corner from Mercy, there's Calvary, there's St. John's, and there's Jackson Chapel. So people get out of church, and what do? But walk around the corner and go into Mercy and just walk up and down the halls. And, hey, what you have? What did you have? How are you doing? And she was like, please, can I get out of here? So just a little aside.
I was born there in 1940, and Dr. Barnes was my doctor.
Yes.
So most of the doctors there then were Black doctors, or the staff and everything, or not?
No, the nursing staff was Black.
Okay. Okay.
There were a number of doctors over the years. Initially, there was Dr. Hargrave. He was joined not long after by Dr. Michener, who was William Michener, who was originally from Johnston County. Dr. Hargrave left in the 1920s. Mercy had a lot of just sort of financial problems through the years, but in the 30s, Dr. Barnes and, well, Dr. Cowan was sort of the staff physician, if you will. Dr. Barnes was practicing, and so he had, of course, practicing privileges. There were always white doctors who came there to, say, for example, to treat certain patients. But if you had to have surgery, for the most part, you would be taken from Mercy over to like Carolina or
Woodard Herring.
Right, Woodard Herring, and you'd have your surgery, and then you would be taken back to Mercy to recover. So, you know, yeah, no, the staff was not integrated.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember Dr. Cowan. My mom, I think, was
Mhm.
one of his patients. And wow. Man, this is phenomenal. Fascinating and all of that. Thank you again, Lisa. Wow.
My pleasure, Eric.
Oh my.
Lisa, thanks again so much for giving this presentation tonight, and for everyone who came, and for Tammy, who put all work into arranging the program with Lisa and everything. When you come in the library, feel free to come up to the local history room and see resources that we have there. And then I've got to call out another one of our staff who's attending tonight from home, Nisha Spade, has made a very nice trifold brochure or trifold presentation downstairs on Wilson's Black history. And we also have a number of books there. We've got African American fiction and a number of books relating to Black history as well.
Perfect.
And for all of you who are interested in genealogy, the 1950 census is supposed to be released this April. So they released the data, as Lisa knows, from the census fairly quickly. But as far as who lives in what house, the names and the ages, it's 72 years after.
Right.
So the last one was released in 1940. So if you have a father or a grandfather who served in World War II, this is going to be the first one with all the baby boomers on it, the people who were born after the war. And I'm wondering what kind of war questions they're going to ask on the census. Sometimes they put in extra questions. And in the 30s, it was like, how many months did you work? And what did you make? So I'm wondering what the questions are going to be for 1950.
And if
it's supposed to come out April Fool's Day, but I don't know when Ancestry and Family Search will have it up.
Right, yeah. If y'all just bear with me for 1 second, I want to get something to show you. So I'm not sure if the library has a copy of this, but if it doesn't, I hope it gets it.
We have it, but
yeah, if you want to know more about the history of Wilson, Black Wilson in particular, this is the book, Greater Freedom, Charles McKinney. It's, I don't know that it's in print now. The last time I looked, it was crazy expensive, but it focuses on the civil rights era in Wilson, but it starts that focus in the 1930s. It tells the story, for example, of Marie Everett, who was jailed at the age of 14 for basically talking back to a white clerk at the Carolina Theater. And it's just really a fascinating book.
We have one copy. It's in the local history collection. We're trying to get another one so it can be checked out.
Gotcha.
We have one,
and
we're trying to get a second one so we can have one that circulates. But we do have it.
That's
and
good.
as somebody just posted in chat, $53.99 on Amazon. So it's
Wow.
It's hard to, it's not easy to find, but it is available.
Yeah.
Man.
Lisa, I have a question. How can you tell and find out who owns the home on a certain street? Is it rented out or is it under management?
You mean currently?
Yeah, currently.
Yeah, well, actually, the tax records, and they're public.
Okay.
Yeah, you just go to Wilson County, I think it's tax assessor, something like that, the website, and you just plug in the address.
Okay.
And it'll tell you who the current owners are.
Okay.
I wish the deeds, I mean, some of the Wilson County's deeds are only digitized from, I think, the 40s, maybe. So that's not quite the resource that it could be, but I mean, I guess that's a funding issue. But certainly current, it had, you know, current deeds are digitized as well.
You can also look back at the old city directories, which we have a lot of, and they will list, you look up by address, and they might list if it's rented or if it's owned.
Okay. Wow.
I'm sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to.
No, you know, hey, that's.
I need to look that school up and see how the school was listed in the city directory. How they listed the Wilson Normal and Industrial Institute, and see how they listed it in the directory, because we have one from 25.
Yeah. I feel like it's not listed at all.
Might not be.
Yeah, the city directory did not do a great job with Black institutions. It listed Black people, but it got pretty skimpy over institutions. So for example, it, you know, sometimes like the biggest churches are sometimes listed, but there are many, many, many other churches that were not. Or they would be listed as simply, you know, Baptist church. And, you know, there might have been 10 different Baptist churches, you know, missionary Baptist churches, free will Baptist churches, primitive Baptist churches, whatever, just Baptist church. So it can be kind of hard to match up, you know, which church is being referred to and that's the other thing too, like you have this idea in your head of sort of where places are, and you like to think that this is where they've always been, and that's not the case. For example, St. Mark's, which is on Reed Street, Reed Street, just below Nash. In my mind, that's kind of where St. Mark's has always been. Well, in fact, St. Mark's started downtown on Spring, which is now Douglas, I think, and Lodge. I'm not sure, somewhere right in there. Trinity, AME Zion, for example, which is now out on Martin Luther King Parkway, started over on Lodge Street, Lodge and Banks streets. So that's an interesting thing that you do find in directories, is that, you know, places kind of move around, which makes sense when you think about it, but you don't really think about it. In some places, about Calvary has always been where Calvary is, more or less. St. John has always been where St. John is, you know. Jackson Chapel started as two different churches, Jackson Chapel and First Missionary Baptist, and they merged. And the Jackson Chapel had been where Wilson Chapel now is. And so it moved over to the corner of Pender and Nash, and Wilson Chapel took its place at Barn Street. So, I mean, it's nerdy, but that when I find out these sorts of things and I sort of make these connections, and like, you know, who knew that, right? Like I walked past these places or drove past them all my life and never knew. There's a term, palimpsest. It's an art term, and it's, you know, it's this idea that, you know, you have sort of layers, like you might have a painting and you remove the top layer of that painting and there's another painting underneath that, and maybe you remove that layer, and so you've sort of reused a canvas. And I think of history, especially local history, as a palimpsest, that there's what we see now, you know, or the way things have been in our lifetimes, but we always have to be mindful that we're just seeing that top layer, and that there's another landscape below that, and then yet another landscape, you know, below that. And part of what Black White Awake does is kind of peel back those layers and allow us to see what has been.
Wow, that's beautiful.
I have a question, Lisa. Has Queen Street always been Queen Street?
Yes, the Queen Street is fairly new. in the East Wilson chronology of things. So, you know, that's another thing, right? East Wilson wasn't really Black until around 1900. I mean, sort of Black people lived kind of out Nash Street, down Manchester, but they also lived what we now think of as downtown, kind of in the warehouse district. There were little pockets down Lodge Street, down there. So one of the things that Sam Vick and his cohorts, the Hines brothers, their mother, Della Hines Barnes, did was essentially create a neighborhood. They bought houses, they bought land on Green Street, and in turn sold land to their friends, sold land to particularly barbers. I mean, there was tons of barbers who lived on Green Street. Well, they're, you know, these are the Hineses and Sam Vick selling, you know, deliberately, intentionally creating a neighborhood. But Carroll Street was the, for a long time, Pender was basically the city line. And then Carroll Street was the city line. Okay. And there weren't really any streets south of Green. So finally, let's say in the early, you know, around, I don't know, the first couple of decades of the 20th century, you started getting the first blocks of Queen, of Carolina, Washington and Atlantic streets were laid out by Sam Vick, and they were named for Booker T. Washington. And it was originally Atlanta Street in honor of his famous speech at the Atlanta Expo. So those streets were named out, were laid out, and then there were the streets that Sam Vick named for his daughters, Elba, Irma, Viola. Those were all Vick daughters. Reed Street, he named after the Reed family. Vick Street, of course, was named after his own family. So, you know, the landscape kind of came together between, say, 1900 and 1920, 1930. And then after, say, 1940, you start getting expansion beyond, say, the 1300 block or so of Queen, Carolina, Washington, Atlanta, toward what's now 301, which of course wasn't there then, but, you know, out that direction. And then you get a little northward expansion. Kind of Vance Street was the northernmost street. Faison Street doesn't get laid out until like 30s and 40s. There's a little pocket of streets above Vance, say from Pender and Vance, east of Pender, Crowell, Academy. That was a white neighborhood. That was a white neighborhood until the 1940s. Vance Street was the boundary between a white neighborhood north toward Gold Street and then a Black neighborhood south. Same thing with those little streets sort of off of, if you go down Reed Street, which was like the middle of nowhere. I mean, when they built the community center in 1938, it was on the edge of town. And there was nothing out there. It was farmland, basically. When they built St. Alphonsus, there's an early picture of St. Alphonsus, and you can see like a tobacco barn in the background on what would now be Academy Street. So those little streets along Gold Street, Harper, I don't even know what they're called, between Ward Boulevard and Gold Street. That was another community that started out as a white neighborhood and became a Black neighborhood probably in the 40s.
Wow. What year was the riot in Wilmington?
1898.
Okay.
So, I mean, I did a talk a couple of years ago about Black neighborhoods in Wilson. this is sort of an endlessly fascinating subject to me. Grabneck is always my favorite. So if you're on Nash Street, headed west from downtown, and you pass the Baptist church, you pass the library, and then you pass the Baptist church, and you start heading into where the big houses are in that stretch of Nash Street. Well, that used to be a Black community called Grabneck, and it was owned primarily by an extended group of families, the Best family. They owned houses up and down through that area. And then in the 1920s, it became identified as sort of a desirable part of town. And essentially, these folks were forced to sell their property to a developer, and they were moved into what was called New Grabneck, which is over by, you know where the Spot is on Tarboro Street? In that area, Starmount Circle, kind of back in there. That was called New Grabneck. And that's where a lot of the families were offered land, sort of, not so much in exchange, but here's $1,000 and a lot over in New Grabneck. And New Grabneck lasted probably into the 40s or so. And then a lot of those families moved into Daniel Hill, which is right across across Hominy Swamp. And then it just kind of disappeared. When I was growing up, that was a white neighborhood. And now I think it's mixed. But yeah, I mean, again, there's this idea that, people think, oh, here's the tracks and it's Black over here and it's white over there. Well, the reality was much more complex. And you had actually Black communities sort of all over, certainly East and South Wilson, until Jim Crow really hardened. Segregation really hardened, which would have been, say, in the 30s or so, 30s and 40s. Wow. Well, listen, I will talk y'all to death. Okay.
And we will listen too.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's meet again. Let's meet again next year this time. Or, as you know, the way I live it, Black History Month is every month. Yeah. So, we don't have to wait till February.
Absolutely.
If somebody wants to bring me back, talk about something else.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Have to go, but it's wonderful. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
We'll start planning for next time.
Okay.
And we have recorded this program, and I put my email in the chat. If you registered for the program through the library, we have your email address. Maybe if someone gave you the Zoom or something, we may not. So feel free to email me. It's agardner@wilson-co.com, and that's in the chat if you want to copy and paste it. And I will be happy to send that your way. Maybe give me a day or two to do a little bit of editing from the beginning before we got going, and then we'll be happy to send that out. And if Lisa's okay to share it on social media as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time.